Hey guys. This is part 3 of What If Naruto Was in Transformers. Hit like and subscribe if you like this one, and also please check the author in the description. Let's start.
We are pain, that's all. We are God.
Chapter 11. Hatake Kakashi slowly blinked his eyes open. Well, as he was very accustomed to keeping his left eye securely shut while waking up from chakra exhaustion, and thus avoid draining his reserves further. These occasions were easy to spot, as it always felt different to wake up from the tired slumber caused by the overusing of his reserves than from ordinary sleep. Normally he woke up silently yet swiftly, instantly alert and ready to move and fight if necessary. Now he came to sluggishly, his mind slowly awakening from the darkness it had descended into. His head was throbbing violently, again, and his whole body felt stiff and sore. He soon realized why. He was hanging from the ceiling, his both arms being stretched to the sides and encircled by multiple loops of chain that went around both his upper arms and forearms, causing his shoulders to bend backwards into an unnatural and painful position. His limbs were already suffering from the strain, aching but still feeling unpleasantly numb at the same time. He flexed his gloved fingers, checking his range of movement. Not good. He couldn't make any seals as he could barely move his restrained arms. And he was still very tired, the small struggling being enough to make him gasp for breath. He growled, hating to be so weak. He turned his attention to the room he was currently being held in. It was dark, so very dark that he could barely see the walls and the corners of the room. He could hear low humming and clanking sounds coming from somewhere, like engines. Some kind of a ship, maybe? There was only one source of light, above him. He bent back his head, the light momentarily blinding him, and he quickly let his head fall back, blinking furiously to dispatch the lights dancing in his field of vision. He glanced down instead. He could see the floor in the white light. The distance wasn't huge, but if he were to fall down the wrong way he could break some bones or twist his ankle, both of which wouldn't be good in his current situation. If he managed to land correctly he would be ready to escape in a relatively short time, so he had been captured. Probably by Decepticons. Not good. His equipment was all in place. His Hittite was still covering his forehead, and the mask hiding his face. He was beyond glad for that. Maybe, just maybe he could, at some point, manage to use some of his weapons stored in the pockets of his vest. He really hoped the Decepticons were arrogant enough to overlook that. The light above made him feel too exposed in the otherwise pitch-black room. He didn't like that light, the merciless white spotlight directed straight at him from the ceiling. It felt too much like he was on some kind of stage as a very unwilling performer, and he had a feeling he wouldn't enjoy tonight's show. He wondered if Naruto was all right. The last thing he remembered was slamming his lighting-filled fist into the visor of the flyer that had dared to touch his student. He recalled seeing Naruto roll away from under the falling Decepticon. So at least the teen hadn't been too badly injured. Then, nothing. He prayed they hadn't gotten Naruto too. He knew for a fact that Naruto wouldn't have just left him there. If he had managed to teach the kids one thing, it was that proper ninjas did not abandon their comrades. And it was outside Naruto's nature to leave his friends behind. So had they captured the boy as well? Were they being held in different premises? Was Naruto somewhere around here, maybe in the next room hanging from chains too? Kakashi drew in a shaky breath. Or, he thought blankly, they could have killed him. He shook his head weakly in denial. No, Naruto was strong, would soon be stronger than him. He would have gotten away. The boy would have fought his way out. Unless he didn't want to leave you at any cost. Unless he was injured severely. His arm did look bad. He might not have been able to make any seals. Kakashi closed his eye. What kind of a teacher was he? Passing out when his student needed him? He should have been more careful. He had known he hadn't been fully recovered yet. He had been reckless, throwing his jutsus around with no thought for the consequences. And now, his student might have had to pay the price. But maybe the Autobots had managed to save Naruto even though they had been too late for him. He hoped so much that it would be the case. Optimus Prime and the rest would keep the boy safe. Otherwise, he would have failed his student as well as the great men who had entrusted him in his care. Ratchet regarded Naruto with worried optics. The boy was somewhat pale and had a slight sheen of sweat on his forehead. He was frowning a little and pursing his lips ever so slightly, clearly still in pain. The medic frowned. He knew very little of human physique, and his inability to help made him frustrated. Luckily Mrs. Darby had fixed the arm. It had looked very painful, and it would heal properly. Speaking of Jack's mother, the kids had apparently told her the whole story as there were some incredulous noises coming from their direction. The white mech rolled his eyes. Trust the children to keep quiet about the matter, really. Optimus went to speak with them for a moment, probably briefing them about the incident, and calling them to join Team Prime. If Naruto was finally about to tell the whole story, the kids deserved to hear about it too. And well, guess Mrs. Darby was now part of that package too. Ratchet glanced briefly at the other members of the team. Both RC and Wheeljack had a very serious look in their optics, and Smokescreen was eyeing Naruto like he wasn't sure how to act around the boy. Ratchet too was more than a little shaken about the conversation that had just taken place, and he truly wondered what had happened out there in the battlefield. Apparently, he would soon find out. He returned his attention to Naruto, who winced slightly while straightening his back. Are you sure you can do this? The boy could have some other injuries too. It would do no good to ignore them. Yeah, I'm fine. Or I'll soon be, Naruto assured, attempting to mask the pain. Ratchet frowned again. Then the other kids were back, followed by a rather shocked-looking Mrs. Darby who was looking at Naruto half incredulously, half suspiciously. Are you ready to begin? Optimus asked, halting beside the teenager sitting on the bed. Yup. The faster we get to rescue Kakashi-sensei, the better. His determined expression turned a little sheepish. I gotta warn you, though, I'm not good at explaining things like this, not like Sensei is. But I'll do my best. And that'll be enough? RC assured with a slight smile. Well, Naruto went silent for a moment, clearly considering the best way to begin. Miko was moving restlessly beside Jack and Raphael, clearly wanting to say something but Bulkhead shushed her. You know how we told you we are ninjas, right? Naruto began slowly, hesitating a little, clearly unaccustomed to explaining such things to beings that had no idea what was going on. That's true, we are ninjas, but we don't fight only with fists and knives and shurikens. From the corner of his optic, Ratchet saw RC and Wheeljack exchanging a look. There's this thing called chakra. It's energy of sorts, formed by both mental and physical force. Naruto scratched the back of his head, looking uneasy. Damn, this is hard to explain, he muttered under his breath before continuing. Well, I can't demonstrate this next one right now, so you just gotta believe me. We can use it with these hand seals. He raised his good hand in front of his face and bent his fingers oddly, but looking rather accustomed to doing that, to do the ninjutsu techniques. Like magic? Miko exclaimed. Naruto frowned. No, but it sounds like magic. What exactly are those techniques? Ratchet interrupted carefully, before Miko could ramble on. Well, for example, Kakashi-sensei has this really cool one. The teen's gaze wandered first to RC and Wheeljack and then to Smokescreen and Optimus Prime. Remember that one con without the head? That was Kakashi-sensei's doing. Miko was apparently again translating everything to English because Ratchet heard Raph let out a gasp shortly after Naruto's words. However, he paid very little attention to it as he himself was trying to comprehend the young ninja's words. His gaze snapped to RC and Wheeljack. The blue femme nodded grimly in agreement. Ratchet blinked. It nearly went over his range of imagination to picture how a human could do such a thing without any guns or other weapons. Bulkhead was almost sputtering, clearly having the same difficulties. Bumblebee let out a shocked chirp. Smokescreen seemed to be recalling the battlefield in his mind and his eyes widened slightly in understanding. You can really do such things? Bulkhead asked. Yeah, and lots of other stuff too. But now that I think about them, they are kind of tricky to explain. But for example, we can travel pretty fast when we boost the movements with chakra. Or hit very hard. Naruto grinned a bit at that before he shook his head a bit sheepishly. I can show you them later, when my arm's okay again. And you can ask Kakashi-sensei about the proper theories when we get him back. He's the teacher. He's supposed to know this stuff. About how you really got here, Ratchet began, finally sensing a way to collect more information. Was it with one of those techniques, then? Yeah, in a way. You know, Kakashi-sensei has this eye. The boy frowned, looking as if he was contemplating if he could tell more or if he had already said too much. Then he seemed to make the decision and continued carefully. He has this, like, really hard technique that can send stuff to another dimension. He tried to block an attack with it, and well, Naruto shrugged. There was an explosion, and the next thing we knew, we were waking up out there in the desert. You really have an ability to send objects, living objects into another dimension by the power of will alone? The medic's voice was disbelieving. The scientist in him was shouting questions that he should ask the ninja right now. The Autobots were capable of similar things too. The incident with the Shadow Zone had shown that much, but that a human could do it without any technology, with some sort of peculiar energy. Ratchet mentally shook his helm. He would have to have a long conversation with Kakashi-san about this. Yeah, but that's very hardcore, elite stuff. And you have to have this Ai-sensei has. He hides it under the headband. Naruto tapped his brow over his left eye. So there was something under that thing. I knew it! Miko shouted in English. Miko, be quiet. Come on, Jack, don't be like that. This is awesome. Who knew they could do stuff like that? Ratchet rolled his optics. Naruto looked a bit puzzled as the other teens were both speaking in other language. Can you tell what else the little man can do with that eye of his? Wheeljack asked curiously and caught the youth's attention again. Well, he can copy other techniques with it. They call him the Copy Nin because of it worldwide. Naruto's voice got a proud tone to it. He's one of the best in Konoha. He's been famous since the Third Shinobi War, I think. You're telling us we've had a war hero here all week? RC exclaimed. Naruto grinned. His expression turned somber. I hope he won't be mad at me for telling this. I mean, we do trust you and you really helped us out, but, he sighed. It's not really information we can throw around. No offense, really, Optimus nodded. We understand, and I'm sure your teacher will understand too. Naruto smiled a little. Yeah, I guess so. Then the blonde boy's expression once more changed, now becoming very serious. I think you want to talk about what happened in the battlefield. Next, he said slowly. Ratchet looked at the others. RC shot a meaningful look at Prime. The leader of the Autobots shook his head ever so slightly and said, We can talk more later. You must be tired. It would be advisable to get some rest now before we continue. Naruto looked like he wanted to argue, but stayed silent and nodded. Ratchet thought he could see a glimpse of relief in the boy's azure eyes. He wondered what the following conversations would bring with them. RC and Wheeljack clearly knew something, and Smokescreen and Prime too had some idea. Bulkhead and Bumblebee both looked at the medic with question in their eyes, but Ratchet could only shake his head. He, too, had no idea what truly was going on. They would have to be patient. Bulkhead herded the other humans. Miko was speaking rapidly in English, telling about everything that had been said, to the other side of the room so Naruto could get some rest. Jack and Raph turned many times to glance back at Naruto. Ratchet sighed. So much had changed very quickly. But guessed that had really been just a matter of time. Mrs. Darby made her way back to them and the occupied hospital bed. She was rather pale and was pursing her lips tightly. I need to check if he has any more injuries, she announced. The look in her eyes clearly said she was not to be contradicted. Ratchet nodded. Please do. He's been through a lot. There was a flash of something unreadable in Mrs. Darby's eyes before the woman nodded and walked to Naruto's bedside once more. She will just check if you have any other injuries, then you can get some sleep, the white medic told Naruto. The boy looked like he would have liked to argue but nodded resignedly, the weariness getting the better of him. Ratchet watched as Jack's mother studied the young male's knuckles with a critical eye. The little cuts and nasty bruises had already started to fade, as if they were days, not hours old. Truly remarkable. He had no idea how long he had been hanging there in the darkness. Just hanging around. Ha ha. What a terrible joke. Obito would have been so disappointed in him. He really was tired. He had fallen asleep at some point. Now that he was awake again, the weariness was still clinging to his mind, trying to drag it back into the oblivion. He blinked slowly, trying to clear his vision after another spell of unconsciousness. He had no idea about the time. He was still rather tired, so the time spent here in the lonely wherever he was could not have been very long. Suddenly there was a loud clanking sound coming from somewhere in the darkness, and a slam that might have been caused by a closing door. He slowly raised his one-eyed gaze and stared into the dark. Sounds of loud footsteps emanated from the edge of the room, slowly coming closer. Soon Kakashi could see a large figure appearing, even darker than the darkness before the Decepticon walked to the halo of the white harsh light. Kakashi found himself staring into red mechanical eyes of a biggest robot he had for now encountered. The being was even taller than Optimus Prime, and despite the fact that Kakashi was already suspended far above the floor, the Decepticon still towered above him. He did not like that, at all. So, you have finally woken up, the robot said in Japanese. Hairs in the back of Kakashi's neck stood up when he heard the voice. It was that kind of voice that immediately told that the speaker was someone very accustomed to eliminating everyone standing in their path, between them and their goal. It was a voice that left no doubt that the speaker believed to be above everyone and everything else. Kakashi put together one and the identity of the Decepticon became very clear. He held the red gaze steadily. Megatron then, I presume? He said smoothly despite his weariness. Megatron chuckled darkly. I see Prime has already told you about me. Wonder what else he has babbled to you about. The eyes flashed. The Autobots do get so easily attached to their human pets. Kakashi narrowed his eye. So you figured out the language part, he said dryly. Megatron scoffed. Just because my subordinate was unable to realize it doesn't mean it was difficult for me. The huge steel-gray Decepticon then slowly walked around him, inspecting him like some fascinating insect in a glass jar. Kakashi flexed his fingers, fixing the con with a harsh glare when he was again face to face with him. About a week ago, Megatron began. Looking down at him, there was an energy spike coming from the desert. Energy not unlike the one of a ground bridge. And when I sent someone there to investigate, they found 2 humans. The red eyes narrowed threateningly. It would be wise to tell me where you came from, you bug, before I decide you are no use for me. Kakashi just stared at him, unblinking and without a word. Megatron laughed. Well, aren't you a brave little crawler? I should warn you that if you refuse to cooperate, there are means to make you scream every little detail of your origin. The voice had changed from amused into vicious. And then you will tell me what you did to destroy my team of Viacons. What, didn't even one of your henchmen survive to tell the tale? Kakashi mocked. Megatron reached out and closed his huge steely claw-like fingers around the chains from which Kakashi was hanging. The Decepticon then yanked him up from the chains so that they were on eye level. The Jounin let out a pained grunt, grimacing as his arms were forced to strain even more. Let me make something clear to you, you pathetic little being, Megatron snarled, his face very close to the ninja's. You may think you can maintain that attitude and defiance, but I can assure you that it won't be for long. Your Autobot friends won't find you, they cannot get aboard, and they definitely won't be able to come and rescue you. We will have a very long time to discuss about you and your abilities. Suddenly there was even more unpleasant glint in the red eyes. And of course, about your companion. Rather interesting topic for a conversation, that little beast. The pain in Kakashi's arms was nothing compared to the agonizing feeling of dread that settled hard and heavy to the pit of his stomach like a piece of a glacier. Megatron must have seen something in his eye because the Decepticon laughed again. Hit a nerve, did I? Kakashi swallowed. No, that could not have happened. If the QB had taken over, that meant anything could have happened. Naruto could have even attacked the Autobots. Kakashi shuddered and resisted the urge to bow his head. No, he would still look the evil in the eye, even if it could now see how shaken he was. I have never seen anything like that before, I must admit, Megatron continued, still holding him up by the chains that were painfully digging to his arms. The boy could be a great use to me, don't you agree, Bug? You can't control it, Kakashi snarled suddenly, rage threatening to take over his mind. It felt so much better than the despair. No one can, least of all you. Oh, but I disagree. And it's not about direct control, human. It's about using the inability to do so. Megatron dropped the chains suddenly, and Kakashi let out a cry of pain when he fell and the chains snapped straight again. It's about deciding where and when that uncontrollable action will happen. The Decepticon towered above him once more, but Kakashi didn't have the strength to look up anymore. He was breathing heavily, eyes closed tightly as he tried to control the pain. And judging by how he went to the rampage after my flyers threatened you, I think I have gained useful insight of how to get him to lose control. Kakashi forced himself to tilt his head back to look the Khan in the eye. Then, it'll be your loss, for he will come after you. He managed to ground out. Then his vision was already turning black. He heard one last thing before the darkness claimed him again. Well, we will see about that. Megatron returned to the bridge and went straight to the computers. Soon the screens were once more displaying the video footage of the blonde-haired human child turning into a raging monster. His optics were trained to the beast, to the furious aura circling it, cloaking it, and apparently giving the human incredible powers. At first he had thought both of the newly arrived humans might have had similar talents. That would have explained how they had managed to destroy the flyers. But according to Soundwave's report, that was not the case. The chief of communications had peculiarly described that the feeling when the monster had surfaced had not been experienced earlier in the battle. And it had seemed to be so uncontrollable, like the kid wasn't really doing it, more like he had just succumbed to the rage. The pleasant conversation with the silver-haired one had just strengthened the theory. The older human had been shocked to hear about the beast. It had not been part of the plan. No, the humans did have some other abilities. And he would unravel them, sooner or later. Oh, this new turnout gave him so many possibilities. He could extract all the information possible from their prisoner, and when they had all the useful data he would contact Team Prime, and then torture, and probably kill the insolent man. Based on the boy's reaction showed on the footage, perhaps that would be more than enough to send the boy into another fit of uncontrollable fury. in the middle of the Autobot base. Of course, his plan needed more information and some of his assumptions required confirmation before it could be properly executed. He would not fail this golden opportunity. "We shall give our guest some rest before questioning him further," the leader of the Decepticons said, and the Viacons nearby snapped into attention. "He's weak and shaken. It won't be long after the pathetic being's resolve will be shattered to pieces." Chapter 12. RC watched as the teenager lying on the ascetic bed quickly succumbed into an uneasy sleep. He was now wearing clean dry clothes, a blue shirt, a black hoodie and gray sweatpants, instead of the former muddy and bloody ones. Even while not awake, the youth's face showed the telling signs of pain. It was never easy to see those signs in another being when you could do nothing to ease off the agony. Luckily, the wounds appeared to be healing rather rapidly, and would not bother the boy for too long. RC sighed. And that took her back to the one topic she knew they would soon have to discuss with Naruto, the monster. If the memory hadn't been so painfully clearly branded into her CPU, she would have thought she'd been dreaming, because the blonde boy in front of him couldn't be the same beast that had nearly attacked them in the woods. But whenever she started to doubt it, the image of the raging monster with red eyes and flaming aura, all in Naruto's body, flashed behind her optics, nearly making her flinch. And every time her optics met with Wheeljack, she knew the wrecker was thinking about the same thing. Naruto's words had also made the alarm scream in her mind. "Did I kill anyone when I was?" RC felt her spark grow cold, nearly stopping its steady pulsing. Had the boy, the monster in him, hurt or even killed someone earlier? Could it happen again? At least the kids seemed to be quite shocked with the situation too, so it had hardly been intentional. Mrs. Darby had found some nasty gashes at Naruto's back and neatly treated them too. Naruto had tried to assure that he was fine and that the cuts would be healed in no time, but Mrs. Darby, somehow understanding the boy's meaning despite the language gap, would have none of it. The wounds were swiftly cleaned and disinfected, though they had been already healing. Now the teen was finally allowed to get some rest before the next conversation would occur. And that talk would probably be long and difficult. Mrs. Darby was standing at Naruto's bedside with an unreadable look in her eyes. "Will he be alright?" Smokescreen asked, eyeing the boy in a concerned way. Jack's mother raised her gaze and walked away from the bed into the Autobots. Bulkhead was still with the other children, probably attempting to calm Miko down from her hyperactive state. "Yes, he will be fine," June said in clipped tone, her arms tightly crossed. "The wounds seem to be healing rapidly. He only needs some rest." She glanced back at the sleeping boy. "He's been through so much." "Yes, he shouldn't have gotten to that battlefield in the first place," Ratchet agreed. Wheeljack threw him a nasty look. "No, I meant he's been through so much all his life," Mrs. Darby snapped, her gaze now blazing with fury as she looked back at them. "Did you not hear what he was telling you? About practically being a soldier, about using techniques created to hurt and kill." "Well, he is a ninja," Wheeljack began. "Well, he shouldn't be," June interrupted. "He's a teenager. He shouldn't be worried about getting his arm almost slashed off in some horrible battle. He shouldn't be proudly telling about skills capable of beheading other living beings." June glanced back at the sleeping youth, angry tears glimmering in her eyes. "He should not be aware of such things yet, or not ever." RC briefly thought about Naruto's words. Based on them, the boy apparently had quite the fighting skills, in addition to the horrible monster, of course. This made her wonder about how long exactly had the teenager been a ninja. "Mrs. Darby, you must remember that he is not from around here," Optimus Prime said, looking down at the dark-haired woman standing arms crossed at his feet. "Their world is different from yours and ours. We do not know enough to so quickly judge them, but training children to be soldiers? That boy is probably younger than Jack." June shook her head, pursing her lips together tightly before continuing. "I'd like to have a word with that teacher of his. Hatake Kakashi seems to be a good man," Ratchet cut into the conversation. "He doesn't want to endanger his student without a reason." June let out a scoff. "He shouldn't be endangered at all," she said coldly. Then she turned and walked to where Miko, Jack and Raph were talking enthusiastically. Bulkhead walked back at the same time, passing her. He reached the Autobots and turned back to glance at the departing, almost furiously stomping, June Darby. Everything okay?" the green mech asked as he turned back to face the others. Ratchet shortly looked at the hospital bed and its current resident. "Could someone now please explain what on Cybertron happened out there?" the medic said, his gaze first at Optimus and Smokescreen before settling on RC and Wheeljack. RC frowned and looked Wheeljack in the optics. "Shouldn't we wait for the kid to wake up?" the wrecker asked slowly, cutting the eye contact with RC in favor of turning to Optimus. "But you clearly saw something," Smokescreen said. "I mean, the battlefield was a mess." And the kid was just in the middle of it all? And what was that about whether he had killed someone? I had a feeling he wasn't talking about the cons, Bulkhead stated. RC was silent for a moment. Wheeljack still seemed reluctant to speak without Naruto's presence. Wheeljack and I had been fighting with Dreadwing and Soundwave before the Silent One had disappeared, RC began. The wrecker shot her a sharp look. When Dreadwing fled, we heard a roar coming from the woods. Ratchet looked like he wanted to interrupt, but Optimus silenced him with a raised hand and nodded at her to continue. So she did. We ran there, fearing that Naruto and Kakashi were in trouble. When we arrived there, RC halted. She felt Wheeljack's gaze on him before she heard the wrecker continue in an uncharacteristically tired voice. There was this thing in the middle of the battlefield. Trashed offline cons were lying around and... Wheeljack shook his head. Man, it was crazy. What was it? RC answered Smokescreen question. It was Naruto, but well, it really wasn't. What's that supposed to mean? It was like some monster had just taken over. RC snapped harshly, tightening her grip of her own upper arms. His eyes were red. I think he had claws and there was a strange sort of an aura around him. She let out a weary sigh. He had clearly just wiped out 3 flyers. With his bare hands alone, silence fell between the bots. So you are saying that he, Ratchet pointed at Naruto's sleeping form, can turn into a beast of some kind? I wouldn't say can, more like turns, Wheeljack said grimly. It didn't really feel like the kid wanted it to happen. Maybe it happens only when he's scared, RC said quietly, as if speaking only to herself. If he feared Kakashi was in danger, it is too early to make assumptions without the facts, Prime said before wild theories would start to fly around. RC couldn't tell what their leader was thinking about this all. We will give Naruto a change to sleep, and then we will see if he can give us some more fact-based answers. We must also create a plan to rescue Hatake Kakashi. We cannot leave him at Megatron's mercy. Ratchet Optimus turned to face the medic. Monitor the battlefield. It is probable that Megatron will want to recover the bodies of his fallen drones sooner than usual, as we must assume he knows that they were beaten by Kakashi and Naruto. Yes, this time Megatron could actually want back his scrap metal, RC muttered as Ratchet nodded, leaving for the computers. Naruto slowly blinked his eyes open. For a moment he couldn't remember a thing before the happenings of the battlefield all rushed back to him, and he groaned aloud, half in pain, half of the intensity of the onslaught of memories. Wheeljack, flyers, Kakashi-sensei, Kyuubi. Sensei! Naruto gasped and shot up to sit on the bed. Whoa, easy! Wheeljack's voice said, and Naruto turned his head to look at the white bot standing at his bedside. There were still quite a many nasty gashes and scrapes on his torso and arms, but at least he seemed to have gotten rid of the mud. How long was I asleep? Naruto croaked and swallowed, trying to get his throat to work. A few hours, not for too long, Ratchet answered, walking to stand beside Wheeljack. A few hours? Naruto yelled. But, we have to save Kakashi-sensei. I have no time to sleep. He started to get up from the bed, but Ratchet made an irritated noise. No, you'll be staying right there. I might not be a human doctor, but I still know better than to let you run around. The medic looked nearly offended that Naruto would have even thought otherwise. The blonde grumbled but stayed in bed. He watched as the rest of the Autobots made their way to stand around the bed. He quickly looked around the base and saw Miko, Jack and Raph and Jack's mother talking on the other side of the room. We told them we wanted to speak with you for a moment, RC explained. Naruto arched his eyebrows. And you got Miko stay away willingly? Whoa, Bulkhead let out a guffaw. She didn't like it, but she'll keep her promise. As long as I keep my end of taking her to the monster truck rally next week. Naruto smiled shortly. Then the smile disappeared as quickly as it had appeared. It would be no use to try to delay the inevitable now. His stomach felt cold and knotted, and there was a nasty taste in his mouth as he swallowed. So, if you want me out from the base, I understand, really. No hard feelings. His statement was met with an incredulous silence. What? Smokescreen let out. Naruto shrugged. No, I mean it. I won't blame you if you want me out after all that. Just let me save Kakashi-sensei first, and I'll be on my... What in the onslaught of scraplets are you going on about? Wheeljack interrupted, his voice bordering angry. That we would throw you out? Just like that? Is that how you see us? Naruto frowned a little and opened his mouth to answer, but Optimus spoke before he could. Naruto, I assure you none of us will want to send you away. And wouldn't you want to tell us what truly happened before making assumptions about our reactions? That's just how everyone sane would react. Naruto muttered under his breath. The Autobots' reaction really surprised him. He looked at RC and Wheeljack, trying to decipher the look in their eyes, searching for fear or anger or disgust. But there were none of those, only something like worry and concern and an honest need for answers. Maybe he had underestimated Team Prime after all. Although they were good guys, he had thought it would have been too much to demand their understanding for something that was so frightening and dangerous even for his own people. And when he had come to from under the influence of the QB out there in the woods, he had seen the shocked fear in RC's eyes. He had been so afraid he had hurt some of the Autobots. That would have been something he couldn't have forgiven himself. Never. Have you already told them about what happened? He asked RC and Wheeljack. Both bots nodded. Naruto drew in a deep breath. Here we go, then. Okay. The thing you saw, it's called the QB, or the nine-tailed demon fox, or all the variables you can make up from that. He smiled lopsidedly before continuing. Years ago the demon attacked my home village and killed lots of people. The Hokage, our leader, fought the demon and sealed it inside a baby to save the village. And well, you might already guess that the baby was me. He sealed that thing inside you? RC asked, eyes blazing. What kind of a person does that? Hey, he only did what he had to do, Naruto said in indignation. It was the only thing that could save the lives of the villagers, and of all the other villages around us. He sacrificed himself in the process. He was a hero. RC looked away, her mouth a tight line. I didn't know about the QB until I was 12. Our leader had ordered that no one should speak about it. He feared that the adults would resent me and the kids would do the same. I found about it accidentally. Must have been harsh, Wheeljack grumbled. Yeah. But I was still made genin, and that meant I got out from the academy and was assigned into a team. That's how I met Kakashi-sensei. But he was getting a little sidetracked now. He was supposed to speak about the demon fox, not dictate his autobiography. So, the demon is sealed inside me and can't get out, but, well, sometimes it kind of does. He frowned a little, thinking how he should approach the matter. First time it happened was during our first proper mission. We had to help this bridge builder to get home safely. We were attacked twice by rogue ninjas, and the second time, for a moment I thought my teammate had died. I was so angry that I just used the QB's chakra. I wanted to kill that bastard so badly. What happened? RC asked quietly. I came to my senses before that happened and didn't kill him, but... Naruto sighed and continued. It has happened after that too, when I'm really angry. Today, he shook his head. Kakashi-sensei had passed out, and I couldn't do any seals cause my arm was useless. And then the cons appeared from nowhere, and I was sure they were gonna kill us or worse. So I just lost control. And that's the last thing I remember about that. RC nodded curtly but didn't look judging or angry. The QB, what does it mean, exactly, when you use its chakra? Ratchet asked. I have naturally big chakra reserves, but the QB has multiple times more, Naruto replied. I get really strong and the chakra protects me from some damage. But it's not good to use it, according to Sensei. It's too much for my body to handle. Luckily I snapped out of it quickly enough this time. Bumblebee let out a curious chirp. How did you manage that? Smokescreen translated. I'm not really sure. I just sort of realized Kakashi-sensei was gone and well, then I was back, he said and shrugged. Apparently the more tails the beast gets, the less I'm in control. There were 3 of them, RC told. The tails, I mean. Naruto nodded. Don't get me wrong, but... Bulk had started slowly. What will we do if that happens again? Kakashi-sensei has a way to stop it. So, that's just one more reason to get him back as soon as possible. Yes, we have already discussed about the rescue of your teacher while you were asleep, Prime said. And, it won't be easy, Ratchet said seriously. He is probably being held on the Nemesis, the Decepticon warship and headquarters. Getting aboard won't be easy. And then we'll have to locate him and get out while staying hidden during the whole thing. The cons are using a cloaking technology to hide it, Wheeljack continued. The ship could be anywhere. And even if we knew where it was, we would have to know the exact coordinates to bridge in. Naruto blinked. The tech talk was going a bit over his head. So how do we get in? We will sneak in when the cons return to the battlefield to collect the dead. They will probably want to study the damage you inflicted on them. But you're not going anywhere, young man. Ratchet's voice was firm and had a universal doctor tone of no nonsense allowed in it. Naruto's temper flared and his blue eyes narrowed. He's my teacher and it's my fault he's out there, in the claws of the cons. So you cannot stop me from joining the rescue team, Ratchet sputtered in indignation. You have just started to recover. You can't go running around the Nemesis. You'll get killed in no time. The QB's chakra allows me to heal a lot faster than normally, Naruto countered fiercely. The rate might be slower here in this dimension, but I'll still soon be fine, and then there'll be no reason for me to stay behind. He straightened his back and forced down the wince that threatened to surface. I'll come with you whether you want to or not. Give him some credit, Doc, Wheeljack said with a shadow of a smile. The kid's quite a fighter, and look what happened when you allowed him to follow you to the battlefield. These battles are not for him to fight. The medic retaliated. Naruto groaned mentally. Seriously, most of the Autobots seemed to be certain he was just a kid, despite everything he had just told them. I can stand my ground, he said determinedly. And what about your chakra reserves? Naruto was actually quite impressed by Ratchet's ability to catch the core of his earlier explanation so easily. You passed out. Practically twice. How can you fight if you're not recovered? I have loads of chakra, much more than Sensei. I haven't used it all yet, and in a few hours I'll be good to go. He flashed them a grin. It was time for his ace up in the sleeve, and when we're aboard that Nemesis thing, I'll be able to locate him at once. You can do that? Smokescreen asked, impressed. Naruto nodded. There are ninjas called sensors back home. They can detect people from very great distances if they're good at what they do. Everyone has their own chakra signature. If I get close enough I could spot Kakashi-sensei, and we'd be there in no time. So are you a sensor then? Ratchet's voice was skeptical. Well, not really. But it's different in here, you know. You, humans or robots, have no chakra. Back home I wouldn't be able to find Sensei because there are chakra signatures everywhere. But here it's like finding a spotlight in an otherwise pitch-black room. I know I can do it. Or at least he thought he could do it. Possibly. Probably. Maybe. Damn, but this was for Kakashi-sensei. It was not about whether he could do it or not, because there was no other option. If he's right, we could head straight for the little man. It would mean a lot less time spent on the enemy territory, Wheeljack mused. What do you say, Prime? Naruto could not read the Autobot leader's face about the matter. Man, his poker face is flawless. Are you certain you will be able to locate your teacher? Prime asked after a short silence. Naruto nodded. I must get him back. I know I can do it if I'll try hard enough. Optimus, with all due respect, you can't seriously consider letting him out there again, Ratchet tried. The medic glanced at Naruto with an apologetic look in his blue eyes. It will do Kakashi no good if you get yourself killed while rushing to save him, Naruto sighed. Ratchet was only worried, he knew, but it was still annoying. I know I made a mistake when I followed Wheeljack, okay? So it is my fault Sensei got captured. I just want to help to get him back. If you get me aboard that ship, I'll locate Kakashi-sensei and then we get out. Simple enough. It's never that simple, RC snorted. But I think you have a point. If I went with him, we could sneak in when the cons were bridging back. And what if you get caught? We won't, Naruto said resolutely. You cannot know that. Ratchet, calm down, Optimus interrupted before the argument could be continued. Naruto held his breath. He knew the Autobot leader would have the final word in this, though I would not like to put him on harm's way. Due to the grave circumstances, I fear there is no other alternative. We cannot afford to ignore Naruto's potential help in this task. RC, Prime turned to face the blue female. There can only be the two of you in order to keep low profile. You must keep him safe. I'll do my best and more, RC told him with a salute. Though Naruto inwardly bristled at that, he really couldn't be annoyed. They were going to save Kakashi-sensei, after all. He could handle some coddling to get to go with the rescue team. Ratchet, have there been any activity around the battlefield? Prime asked. Negative. Ratchet shook his head, his eyes grim and a little resigned. The medic glanced at the silent computer screens. There has been neither bridge activity nor Decepticon signals coming from the woods or the old Energon mine. They haven't yet returned. But you are sure they'll come back? Naruto was slightly skeptical. If Team Prime was wrong, they would be just wasting their time and Kakashi-sensei would have to pay the price. Yeah, they'll be there, Bulkhead grumbled. I don't think Knockout will pass the opportunity to get those sparkless shells under his microscope. He would just have to trust them, then. The Autobots had already trusted him a great deal. The least he could do was to return the favor. Sensei, he thought as he lied back on the hospital bed. We'll be there soon. Just hang on. So, Jack started as they sat on the couch, all eyeing the Autobots talking to Naruto on the other side of the room. What the heck was that? That, Jack, was the sweetest thing ever since the robots from outer space, Miko declared, punching the air before slumping back to the couch. Jack frowned at her. I mean, the girl said excitedly, jumping off the sofa to stand before him and Raph, who was too sitting on the couch, legs crossed. Come on! Didn't you hear what he was saying? About all those cool ninja skills? You think he'll show us when he gets better? They sounded dangerous though, Raph said, leaning his head on his hands. Despite her enthusiasm, Miko had translated the whole conversation to the boys, and Jack had to agree with Raph. They had sounded dangerous. So are Autobots if you start to think about it. They are good guys, Miko replied, throwing herself back on the sofa. Jack glanced at his mother, who stood by the railing, arms crossed and eyes trained on the Autobots and Naruto. He knew something was bothering her, and he had heard her arguing with the Autobots, probably about Naruto. He hoped she didn't think Naruto was in any way a danger to them. Though the ninja's skills sounded dangerous, Naruto was still a friend. Do you think Kakashi is alright? Raphael asked, looking worried. Jack grimaced and turned back to his friends. He remembered when the Khans had captured Fowler. Kakashi had seemed to be a rather tough fellow, and he hoped he could endure whatever the Decepticons were putting him through. Don't worry, Raph, they'll save him in no time, Miko assured, though there was a glint of concern in her eyes too, lurking behind the determination. And maybe he can, escape, Jack reasoned. I mean, according to Naruto, he's a great ninja. Yeah, Raph said, trying to smile. Then the three teenagers succumbed into silence as they started to wait for the situation to change. Jack sighed. He hated waiting. His vision was blurred, the illuminated patch of gray floor swimming in and out from focus. He blinked his eye tiredly, and after a moment managing to raise his head, he was alone. Silence was simultaneously oppressive and relieving. It meant there were no Decepticons there in the dark. It meant that he was truly alone, and could use this moment of peace to rest and perhaps plan his escape. He tried to get his mind to work, his thoughts sluggish from the pain. Megatron had kept his word. The next time he had woken up, the Decepticon leader had been there with a nice little device of torture with him. His skin and muscles still burned and ached from where he'd been electrocuted. He had lost consciousness after what had felt like an eternity, but without saying a word. Megatron would get nothing out of him. The Decepticon leader had over and over again questioned him about how they had got here, what had been that lighting soundwave had seen him use, how their powers worked, what Naruto was. He had given him nothing. No, he was apparently allowed to have a small moment of respite, probably so they wouldn't accidentally kill him. How merciful. He forced his mind out from repeating the torture, forced himself to observe his surroundings and once more make sure he truly was left alone. He cursed his weak state. If he had been stronger, then maybe he would have been able to get something of use from his vest or a kunai from the holster. But every movement brought more pain and he was still unable to reach his vest. He moved his legs a bit. They were left untied, but there was no way he could reach the holster either. He growled in frustration. He tried to turn his hand so he could grip the chain closest to it, but it was no use. It was too far and he couldn't twist his arm enough to grab it. If he'd been stronger, he might have been able to do something, anything to aid his escape, but for now he had to admit he was too weak. So he momentarily resigned to his fate. He closed his eye and lowered his head. If he couldn't escape for now, he should use the time given to gather his strength. He let the meditative peace wash over him, blocking away the pain from his mind. No use to wallow in pain and desperation. He drew in a deep breath and concentrated on his chakra reserves. They were still practically non-existent, as was his physical strength. He hung there, barely moving, eyes closed. He didn't know for how long. Chapter 13. Naruto was carefully unwrapping the bandages from his injured arm. He was grimacing only a little, RC noted with some amount of incredulity. The femme watched as the boy got the bandages properly off and carefully stretched his arm. RC's optics widened as she saw that there was only a thin scar left on the skin, like the wound had been healing for weeks and not hours. Do you really recover so quickly every time you're injured? The bot asked as Naruto flexed his fingers and bent his arm to check the range of motion. Apparently he was happy with it because he pulled his hoodie back on and turned to RC. Pretty much yes, it's probably a little slower now since the Kyuubi is a bit weaker, but quite fast nonetheless. Naruto flashed her a smile. Luckily. Otherwise I would have been useless for ages. Recovering is so boring. RC slanted an eyebrow. Well, maybe you should avoid getting hurt then. You're sure you'll be in shape to fight off? Yup. I've already recovered a bit, and I'm now able to use both my arms. He moved the injured arm again, and apparently there was hardly any pain as he smiled. I'm back in action. You're still sure about this, then? The young ninja's expression turned serious. There are no other options. This is about Kakashi-sensei, and it's my fault he's currently with the Khans. I can't just stay behind. RC nodded in understanding. She wouldn't have been able to stay at the base either if she had been in the same situation. I always did think there was something funny with you guys, she said, but now without suspicion or blame. That there was something you weren't telling us. Yeah. Naruto smiled sheepishly. You know, I really wanted to tell, but Kakashi-sensei didn't think it would be wise. He's not used to revealing his ninja secrets. Guess that is wise of him. I just hope he won't be mad I told you all that, Naruto said, frowning a little. Well, he seems to be a smart man, RC chuckled. I think he'll understand. Guess you're right. Naruto smiled, standing up from the bed and stretching his muscles a bit. So, when will we leave? As soon as the cons return to the battlefield. Ratchet's still monitoring it. He will alert us the moment there's a Decepticon signal. Naruto looked doubtful. Isn't it a bit of risky for them to head back there? Are you absolutely sure they'll come? It's very likely. They are probably attempting to interrogate Kakashi, and they'll need as much information as they can get. They won't leave the flyers you killed to rust in some forlorn forest. They'll fetch them soon to get a chance to study them. Yeah, that does make sense. Naruto nodded absently and sighed, his eyes too grim for a boy of his age. I'm just hoping they do it soon. Kakashi-sensei is one of the toughest ninjas I know, but I don't want him to spend a minute longer on that ship. RC smiled somberly. I know how you feel, kid. Wheeljack, who had been speaking with Ratchet, wandered to where RC and Naruto were standing by the hospital bed. So, the wrecker began with a lopsided grin as he came to a halt beside them. How are you doing, kid? Naruto grinned. Great. The wound's all but healed now. To demonstrate, he tugged up the sleeve of the hoodie and showed the scar along the arm. The wrecker let out a bark of laughter. Unbelievable. That seems really handy, eh? Do you think there's a way to get me some healing powers too? Naruto rolled his eyes and tugged the sleeve back down. Not sure you would want to. Having a demon inside you isn't that funny, though there is at least some good stuff that comes along. Wheeljack looked at him with an unreadable look in his optics. You've really gone through all your life with that beast sealed in you. Naruto simply nodded. Yeah. Well, I didn't know of it until a couple of years back. Though I always wondered why the adults didn't like me. Gotta say, kid, there are some stupid humans in your village, Wheeljack grumbled. No offense. Naruto shrugged a bit. It's okay. I kinda understand them. Most of them didn't really know me, but they do know the demon. They have a good reason to be cautious. I don't like it, of course, but I just gotta be the one to change their minds. And not all of them think I'm a dangerous demon spawn. Like Kakashi-sensei and the Hokage and Iruka-sensei. You have another teacher? RC asked, intrigued. Yeah, Iruka-sensei's the best. He's not really my teacher anymore, but he taught me in the academy where we learn all the basics. He didn't accuse me for what happened to Konoha. He always helped me and even saved my life once. Sounds like a good guy, Wheeljack said approvingly. Naruto smiled. He is. He would like you guys, once he was through freaking out first. RC's and Wheeljack's laughter was cut off by a loud beeping sound coming from the computers. It's the Decepticons. Ratchet called out urgently. They have returned. I'm receiving 5 energon signals from the battleground. RC straightened. Naruto's eyes were practically gleaming with restricted enthusiasm and fierce determination. The boy hurried to stand beside the medic, RC and Wheeljack following closely behind. They're there now? Naruto asked. Ratchet nodded. Just arrived. The rest of the Autobots were also gathering around the computers, and the kids were hurrying to stand beside their robotic friends. So, what are we waiting for? Naruto asked impatiently. Let's stop wasting time and get going already. Ratchet frowned a little. Are you still sure you want to? Yes, Naruto said empathically. I am completely sure I want to go. I am fit enough to fight and I can defend myself. Really? The medic narrowed his optics. I still don't want to send you there. You were unconscious just hours ago. You were wounded. I was unconscious half a day ago. And now I'm fine. See? Naruto waved his healed arm without any signs of pain or discomfort. It's alright, I'm alright, and there's nothing to hold me back. Ratchet's mouth was a thin line, but he nodded reluctantly. I'll keep him in check, Ratchet, RC said confidently. The blue femme knew the medic didn't want to risk his patient getting hurt again, and she wouldn't let that happen either. There was also someone else who was very much against sending Naruto back to the battlefield. You can't seriously be even considering this. Everyone turned their gazes to June Darby who, having apparently carefully listened to Miko's real-time translation, stood with her arms crossed and glared at the Autobots with all her motherly fury. He just came back, June seethed without letting any of them interrupt, wounded, battered, almost killed, and now you are allowing him to return. Isn't any of you noticing how utterly wrong this is? Naruto frowned at the unfamiliar English language being used. What's she saying? She isn't too happy about you attending the rescue mission, RC said quietly. Naruto frowned. Why, in this world humans are very keen to keep their children away from any kind of battle. But I'm not a child. You are to them. Naruto huffed, clearly annoyed at being coddled. Please tell her I'll be just fine. RC glanced at Wheeljack, who was arguing with Jack's mother. I doubt she'll believe it, Naruto sighed. I have a plan. It'll demand a lot, but I'm still confident it'll work. The Decepticons don't know all of my abilities, so they won't be expecting them. And I have the means to locate Kakashi-sensei. I can't not go. RC gave him a small smile. She looked at where the others were standing. Mrs. Darby was no longer arguing, but her glare, which was currently directed at both Optimus Prime and Wheeljack, could have made many lesser beings flee. Naruto was looking at her, clearly a bit uncomfortable to just dismiss Jack's mother's worry, but still determined to join the mission. We will be standing by, Prime said. If something goes wrong at the battlefield, just let us know, and we will be there to back you up. Naruto grinned and saluted. Ratchet worked with the bridge control and the green portal came to life. The ninja gave RC a lopsided grin. Well, let's get going then. The forest floor was muddy and wet. Apparently there had been more rains after the battle. Knockout was rather pleased of the fact that it wasn't raining right now. The forest was muddy and nasty enough without even more water coming to ruin the day. He paced through the battlefield, carefully eyeing the fallen sparkless Viacons lying on the ground. They were all practically blown to pieces. There now still shells missing large chunks of metal that could be found blackened around the area. One was even missing its head. In the forest more fallen flyers could be found, their shells similarly destroyed. Knockout kicked a headless body lying in a puddle of mud and rainwater. A loud clank echoed around the forest. He looked down at the headless mech. Its torso was badly blackened around where the head should have been. The flyer in question had apparently been taken out by the human currently held in the cargo bin of the Nemesis. Knockout smirked. Oh, he'd love to take these fellows apart and discover as much as possible of how exactly the human had pulled this one off. The human had been very silent about his abilities, and Lord Megatron believed they could find something more about them indirectly by studying the dead flyers. Knockout, for one, was sure he'd find that something. Well, get to work. He called out to the small group of Viacons hovering on the background. Get these rusty pieces of junk metal to the ship. And this time, do not take them straight into the medical bay. I will not have a bunch of scrap metal lying around in my premises. The Viacons hurried to work. Knockout watched them work for a while, the smirk still on his face, before returning to the ship to wait for his patients to arrive. Oh, how he loved his job sometimes. Do you see them? RC carefully peeked over the large rock that was their cover and hiding place. She swept her gaze over the woods and caught a glimpse of a Viacon hauling a battered shell of a dead flyer towards a pile of metallic bodies beside two other Viacons. Yes, she replied to the blonde boy crouching beside her. I see 3, no, 4 of them. I think they have soon gotten all of the dead flyers, so they are going to get them aboard via ground bridge? Very likely. Otherwise they would have to bring the Nemesis here, and I don't think Megatron will be taking that risk. Isn't this already quite a risk for them? Don't they know we'll be trying to get Sensei back? Of course they think that, but they can't afford to let them to rust here. I doubt your teacher is going to let them know what they want, so they'll have to get that information via other sources. Naruto nodded, an angry frown on his face. Anyway, we'll have to get moving if we want my plan to work. RC watched the Viacon drag the dead flyer into the pile of other broken drones. There were probably already 6 or 7 of them there. There was a puff of smoke beside her, and she glanced at Naruto, startled. She was even more startled when she realized what she was seeing. There were now 2 blonde boys crouching beside the rock. RC blinked, dimly aware that her mouth was probably actually hanging open. She found herself wondering if her CPU had crashed or malfunctioned and was showing everything double. The feeling intensified when there were identical smirks blooming on both ninjas' faces. What on? A shadow clone technique, Naruto said. The real Naruto? The original Naruto? She had no idea, matter-of-factly, clearly immensely proud of himself. It's my specialty. They are very realistic clones. They can think for themselves and can fool anyone until they receive damage. Then they'll disappear. How dash! Chakra is a pretty awesome thing. Naruto grinned and turned to the clone. Circle around and get their attention so we'll get closer. Don't let them see you die or they'll suspect something. The clone saluted with a smirk and rushed off. RC stared after it. Him? Naruto let out a silent laugh. And that wasn't even the coolest thing I can do. RC shook her head in wonder. She forced herself to focus. Now was not the time to lose concentration. They both peered over the rock, watching another dead shell being dragged to the others. RC narrowed her optics. There, she thought when she saw the Naruto doppelganger appear behind the trees on the other side of the Viacons. One of Megatron's minions saw it. The other Viacons turned to face it too. She couldn't hear what they were communicating, but two Viacons swiftly rushed after the clone, which turned around and ran off. "Now!" Naruto said and jumped over the rock, but otherwise staying low as he rushed closer, RC at his heels. The remaining Viacons were standing by the pile of dead flyers, the other one apparently speaking via comlink. They reached a spot that was far enough from the Viacons but close enough a body of a flyer that was probably the last one of the dispatch teams. RC saw a glow of a ground bridge appear and two more Viacons jumped out. The green glow was soon gone and the new arrivals rushed to the direction where Naruto's clone had headed. "Lie down," Naruto commanded. RC frowned but did as she was told. Naruto crouched beside her and looked at her, face very serious. "We have to stay as still as possible until we're inside, okay?" RC frowned but nodded. "I'm pretty sure this will work. I trained a bit back at the base. Just don't freak out when it happens, okay? You're pretty sure it will work?" "And why would I?" She abruptly stopped talking as Naruto closed his eyes, his face an image of deep concentration as he formed some peculiar marks with his hands and fingers, and then Naruto was gone and there was a dead flyer missing a chunk from its torso lying beside her. She barely restrained herself from crying out in alarm. "What in the name of the 13 primes? How is this even possible?" She became even more freaked out when she glanced at her own arm and it looked exactly like one of a flyer's. For a moment she thought she couldn't do this. But she remembered Naruto's words and forced herself to stay still. There was still a voice screaming "impossible" in her head, but she pushed it to the back of her mind. As she regarded the camouflage ninja in front of her, she realized the illusion, because it had to be one, though RC still couldn't figure out how the kid was doing it, wasn't a perfect one. Some bits were a little wrong and strange, like the scratches in the metal or some more complex parts of robot anatomy. If Naruto had been trying to make an illusion of a normal, unbroken Viacon, he wouldn't have succeeded. But here, among other mangled, destroyed and totally broken dead cons, Naruto's versions might just pass the test. She remembered the blonde ninja's words from earlier. He had a plan. It would take a lot from him, but he was rather sure he could make it. And if it succeeded, they would get inside the ship with no one being any wiser. She could only hope the boy could hold on. After a moment there were footsteps coming closer. Then two flyers appeared to her field of vision. RC's spark went wild for a moment, going cold in her chest as she watched the two minions study at them closely. They'll know. They'll notice something is wrong. They'll know. Then there was a metallic hand clasping at her ankle, and she was being dragged towards the pile of dead cons. RC could have laughed with relief as she watched the other con grab Naruto the dead flyer, and start hauling him towards the others. Her foot was released as she was left lying beside a bunch of broke Viacons. There was another thump beside her and Naruto too was released. Then they simply had to wait. Is that all? ST3V3 is retrieving the last one. Are they saying a human did this? I cannot believe it either. Are they sure it wasn't just the Autobots? According to Lord Megatron, the TIC had a video footage of the fight. It's true. RC would have shaken her head if she hadn't had to stay as unmoving as possible. She heard approaching footsteps and the rest of the Viacons returned. Did you get the human? There was no trace of it. Lord Megatron won't be pleased. At least it couldn't get close. That'll be enough, one of the Viacons assured, though there was an unsure strain in his voice. Ha! Under Megatron's iron fist there is no room for failures. After a while, when one more body had been brought to them, the green glow of the appearing ground bridge illuminated the woods. The Viacons started to drag the bodies inside one by one. One of the minions grabbed RC by arm, and then she was being dragged into the green glow. And aboard the Nemesis, they were in. They appeared into the ground bridge control room, where a bunch of other Viacons nodded at their fellow cons and let them out of the door and into the corridors. They really were in. Maybe this would work after all. It wasn't long until she was hauled into an empty room and left there with the sparkless shells. Her spark fluttered in her chest. Phase 1, nearly done. And no one was any wiser of their intrusion. She heard one of the Viacons speak. No, take the last one straight to the medbay. Dr. Knockout will want to start working right away. Then the door hissed closed and silence fell. RC was transformed back. She rolled to her back and sat up, hardly believing everything had really gone according to plan. They had been brought in by the Decepticons themselves. Wheeljack would howl with laughter when they told him, and now Naruto would just have to find Kakashi's signature thing and… Naruto? She kept her voice low as she looked around in the gloomy room. She was already back to normal. Why wasn't Naruto? There were only about 10 lifeless shells there in the room with her. No sign of Naruto. The ninja had clearly dropped RC's cover at the moment when she had been left alone, so why hadn't she froze? No way. No way. Scrap. This was more horrible than Naruto could have ever expected. He knew he didn't have that good chakra control yet. It had never been his forte. He was more of the type to create a small army of clones and Rasengan the bad guys into the next week. He liked that style. It fit him and it fit his large chakra reserves. However, now he was in a situation where he had to sneak 2 people into the enemy home ground. Even further than Megatron's backyard. Into the freaking Decepticon headquarters. They couldn't be noticed. They'd never get Kakashi-sensei out if they were discovered too soon. Back home, transformation jutsu probably wouldn't have worked as well as here. Back home, all the enemies had chakra too. They were expecting foul play like sneaking in via transformation technique. They were trained to spot them. He would have never had a chance there. But here, no one had chakra. No one had heard of clones or disguising oneself with illusions. Here, even Naruto could maybe, just maybe pull this off. After all, they didn't need to come across as perfect flyers. Only mangled and destroyed ones. It still was horrible. He had to concentrate all the time, not just to his own appearance but to RC's as well. And maintain it while they were moved. All the time they were dragged around, Naruto was sure his focus would slip and something freaky would happen and the cons would figure them out. He had tried this out back in the base and tested if he could do it. It was possible. Even if RC had no chakra, he could still use his own chakra to use the transformation jutsu on her too. It was just damn hard, but he had to do this. Kakashi-sensei was counting on him, so he reached for whatever mental strength he had left, and decided that if there was one time he needed to be good at this, it would be today. Even if it demanded more focus and mental strain than anything he had done before, and it made him feel like his brain was about to start bleeding. They were currently being hauled through the corridors of the Nemesis. If he could have spared his attention, he would have been very eager to study the Decepticon warship. But now really wasn't the time. He watched as the Viacons took their dead comrades into an empty room. RC was taken in too. Just when the con hauling Naruto down the corridor was about to throw him in as well, one of the Viacons spoke up. "No, take the last one straight to the medbay. Dr. Knockout will want to start right away." Oh. Damn. This couldn't be happening. Why couldn't his plans work when they really needed to? And this was such a good plan too. This was just sheer terrible luck. He watched the door slip closed, and at that moment he dropped the jutsu covering RC. He immediately felt relieved, as the only thing he now had to concentrate on was his own disguise. It was still damn demanding, but not as horrible as earlier. He could do nothing as the con nodded and continued hauling him forwards. Luckily the med bay wasn't far away, as he was quite quickly brought into and through a room that looked like a crazy scientist's lab. Freaky. He was taken into a bit smaller room that had an uncomfortable-looking bed table whatever in it. The Viacon now had help, and together the 2 cons lifted him up and onto the berth. Then they left him there. The door banged closed. Scrap. Chapter 14. Naruto immediately dropped the jutsu and morphed back to himself. He let out a gasp of immense relief, as it no longer felt like his brain was going to bleed out from the amount of mental strain the technique had demanded. Damn. He'd be euphoric if he didn't have to do that horrible thing ever again. He sat up and looked around in the room he had been taken to. It had a few computers by the walls, and some science and medical stuff that looked slightly disturbing, neatly laid there on several tables and trays. The whole place was like some mad scientist's lab. Which it probably was. He was at the med bay, and at any moment that knockout guy could walk right in. Big problem. Conclusion. It really was a high time to take off. He was just about to jump down from the berth when he heard the first door to the medbay swoosh open. Kakashi-sensei would have been proud of the speed at which he managed to go through the hand seals of the transformation jutsu and change back into the battered body of a flyer. He nearly fell down to the floor in the progress, as he had to suddenly go limp and unmoving again. The door to the room opened and a Viacon stepped in. This was just marvelous. Absolutely freaking fantastic. Well, guess it could have been worse. At least the mad scientist wasn't here yet to cut him to pieces. Small mercies. He watched as the Viacon briefly glanced at him, and then went to do something at the computers. Naruto contemplated whether to knock it out or not, but he had no time to make a decision as the con turned back again. Maybe it would just leave and go do whatever the Viacons did on their free time. If they really had any free time. Of course, it had already become quite clear that there wasn't going to be any more luck for him today. The Viacon stepped closer and seemed to be closely inspecting the illusion of its dead comrade. For obvious reasons, Naruto really couldn't know what, exactly, the Decepticon was thinking, but from the intense visored stare he was getting, he guessed the con was beginning to get suspicious. Scrap. It was probably finally paying attention to all the faulty details and wondering what was wrong. The door hissed open. The Viacon started to turn. Naruto immediately dropped the jutsu and made another, this time a shadow clone that puffed into existence right beside the berth. As RC shot the Viacon straight to the chest, Naruto already had the Rasengan spinning madly in his palm. The clone disappeared in a cloud of smoke as Naruto slammed the Rasengan to the back of the con's head. The Viacon dropped dead to the floor with a clang. Sad sparks sizzled from the decapitated torso, and blue liquid dripped sluggishly from the ragged dent in its chest and fell down to stain the otherwise spotless floor. Naruto and RC looked at each other. "Do you think anyone heard that?" the teen asked. "Probably someone did, but I doubt they care. I don't think Knockout is known for being silent when attending to his patients." Naruto huffed a laugh and jumped down from the berth. RC grabbed the Viacon and grunted as she pulled it up and onto the berth. Knockout would get the test subject he wanted and nobody would be any wiser. They quietly sneaked to the door. Naruto glanced out, but there was no one in sight. The ninja then followed RC to a small room not far from the medical bay. There were over half a dozen dead Viacons lying in a disregarded pile on the floor inside, the very same ones the other cons had just hauled in. "I don't think they'll come back here anytime soon," RC said. "You should have enough time to locate Kakashi." Naruto nodded curtly. This was his moment. The whole operation counted on their ability to be fast to locate their target. There was no way he was going to fail this. Now, he only had to get it to work. He took a deep breath and closed his eyes. "How long do you need?" RC asked. "I don't know," he murmured. It wasn't like he had really done something like this before. Back home, everyone got chakra. Here, in addition to himself, there was only one. This should be easy. Piece of a strawberry-topped cake. Child's play. He only needed that one chakra signal. He could do that, right? He could. He would. He had to. There was a familiar flare of faint power coming from somewhere nearby. It really was like a lone beeping noise in an otherwise silent house. Back home, he wouldn't have found it. It would have been drowned under all the other noises, sounds, clanks and beeps and rattles. Here it was, a beacon flaring in the dark, calling him, beckoning to him, pleading him to hurry. He opened his eyes. RC was looking at him closely, blue eyes glowing in the gloomy room. "I know where he is," Naruto breathed. Her eyes looked like they shone a bit more brightly. "Where?" "Down." He waved his hand a bit before pointing somewhere behind RC. "And that way, if it helps." RC nodded. "We'll get further down first, then we'll stop again, and you can give more directions." Naruto grinned. This was working. His idea, his plan, was actually working. They really would get Kakashi-sensei out of this place. They took positions by the door. RC turned to look at him. "Can you do that illusion again?" Naruto grimaced and shook his head. "Sorry, no. The first time was bad enough, and I don't think I could keep it up long enough. And they would have to look really real. And we'd have to move too. No chance it would work." RC nodded in understanding. "Then we'll just have to be careful." They watched as a pair of Viacons slowly strolled past the door and soon disappeared behind a corner. They waited for a moment, and when there was no one in sight they sneaked to the corridor. The big metallic hallways of the Nemesis were silent and empty. Naruto stayed close to RC, who was walking quietly beside the wall. A couple of times they had to hide behind corners or to the niches in the walls to stay out of sight of the occasional patrolling and passing guards. Once they even had to hide from Knockout as the medical officer walked right past them on the silent corridors, optics glued to a datapad, most likely showing statistics and reports of the previously fallen drones, a content chuckle escaping his lips. Naruto shuddered. The guy was creepy. He felt a bit bad for the Viacon back in the med bay, even if it currently was quite, well, dead. They continued skulking forwards. At last they saw the elevators at the end of the corridor. And there were no guards in sight. As they hurried to the elevator doors, Naruto let out a relieved breath. Just maybe they could actually do this. Knockout stepped into the med bay. The Viacons had informed him that the dead flyers had been brought aboard and a test subject was already waiting for him in the operation room berth. The doctor hummed to himself, very much looking forward to the chance to slice into a drone killed by the tricky human pests. He would surely discover something new about their powers. The door to the operation room hissed open and Knockout stepped in. There was a shell of a flyer lying unmoving on the berth. "Well, hello there," the doctor purred, walking around the berth to inspect his newest patient. The drone's head was missing and there was a wound on its chest. Pitiful, truly. Knockout halted at the side of the berth and narrowed his optics. He leaned in to take a closer look. There was still some energon leaking from the blackened hole in the torso where the head should have been, as well as from the big dent and cracks in the middle of the chest. It dripped lazily from the wounds to pool on the berth and on the floor. New wounds, the doctor murmured. And signs of very recent melting. Yes, he checked, tapping the edge of the ragged hole with one clawed fingertip. The metal was still warm, even though the wound should have been nearly half a day old. Of course it could have been some weird human powers causing it, but Knockout found it rather unlikely. He was a scientist after all, not one to take things on possibilities and guesswork. A much better explanation was that the injuries were newer. Much newer. Soundwave, the doctor said, contacting the communications chief through the comlink. I think we might have a security breach. Soundwave stood at the bridge, the blank visor staring at the Icon database codes currently running on the displays. There were only a few other Decepticons on the bridge, standing at guard beside the doors and staring blankly ahead. There was a contact for him through the comlink. Soundwave tilted his head. The intelligence officer's claw-like fingers ran over the keyboards, and the current work disappeared from the screens to make room for the security camera feeds. He chose the camera on the hallway outside the med bay and rewound the video. Then he stared at the video footage of the corridor, watched as a Viacon dragged a dead flyer into the med bay and exited after a brief moment. Then there was another Viacon entering, and quickly after it, the small Autobot RC. Then, only after a few clicks, RC and the blonde human came out from the med bay and sneaked outside the reach of the camera. As he sped through the other camera footages currently recording the many corners of the Nemesis, he stopped only when he caught the glimpse of the two intruders currently standing in the elevator on their way down towards the lowest deck. Soundwave raised the alarm. They had just stepped out from the elevator and into a new corridor, looking very much like the previous one, when there were running footsteps rapidly approaching from behind the nearest corner. A siren started to blare deafeningly and ricocheted everywhere. RC turned to look at Naruto, who returned the gaze. They both ran. Which way? The femme shouted over the screaming alarm, glancing at the ninja who was running beside the Autobot, keeping up a rather admirable speed for a human. They raced through the corridor, trying to get away from their pursuers who were adamantly chasing them through the ship. Give me a moment, Naruto grumbled and squinted his eyes. Then the blue eyes widened and the blonde ninja gained even more speed and turned left from the next corner. This way, they continued their mad escape, passing doors and other hallways, but apparently none of them was the right one as Naruto kept racing forwards. Then there were sounds of weapons being fired behind them and red lasers dashed past them, a few of them much too close for comfort. Stray shots hit the walls and ceiling, sending up sparks and leaving behind blackened marks. Scrap! RC cursed, turning around to fire a few shots at the Viacons running after them before catching up with Naruto again. How much further? I'm not sure, the ninja replied. But I think we're getting closer. A door further in the corridor opened and two Viacons stepped out. Damn! Naruto shouted at the same time as there were more shots being fired at them by the guards. I'll take care of these guys, you take the other ones. RC's first reaction was to immediately refuse to let the teenager go off by himself. He was a human after all, small and fragile, with soft flesh, traitorous blood and easily breakable bones and tendons. Then she remembered the ball of energy the young ninja had slammed to the Viacon's head and cut back the words about to be uttered. It was clear the boy wasn't, despite his young age, helpless at all but quite competent to keep up in a fight. She would just have to trust Naruto could take care of himself, and hope Kakashi wouldn't have her head if the kid got injured. As the ninja darted forwards to meet the two cons, RC turned around and pressed herself against the corridor wall, beginning to fire rapidly at the approaching Viacons. The drones were forced to take cover and started to fire back. The shots echoed loudly on the hallways and sent sparks around while missing and hitting the walls, ceiling and the corridor floor. RC hit one of their pursuers to the head, and after a few more precise shots the Viacon dropped to the ground, unmoving. There was a crash and a screeching sound of cracking metal from behind her. RC glanced over her shoulder just in time to see the other con hit the ground hard, a sparking hole in its chest. The other one was currently attempting to squash a Naruto clone, or was it the original one? She had no idea, before it too got hit in the head by a whirling ball of pure white energy. RC! Naruto hollered, the clones once more disappearing from sight. Come on! RC fired a few more shots at the other end of the corridor, and then turned to run after Naruto. Where are the other guards? Naruto panted with slight confusion. If the alarm was raised already, why aren't there more? RC smiled grimly. I guess our distraction has been noticed. A distraction? Smokescreen and Bumblebee were to stage an attack in a Decepticon energon mine. Won't they know it's a distraction? They know why we're here, after all. Oh, they do know it, but that doesn't mean they don't have to send reinforcements to defend the mine, RC replied. Naruto grinned widely. A few times RC turned around to fire a few blasts of blue laser at their pursuer, hitting the remaining one and forcing it to stumble. After a short moment of more running, Naruto stopped by a wall. "He's here!" the boy cried. RC looked around in the corridor but couldn't see any doors. The corridor continued to both ways without a sign of a corner anytime soon. "If we continue that way, maybe we'll," she began. And then Naruto was striking the energy he was holding on his palm through the thick metal wall. There was a horrible crash and screeching wail of metal being torn open, and then RC was staring at a big ragged hole on the previously intact wall. Even though she now knew what the boy was capable of, it still was quite disconcerting to actually witness it time after time again. Then Naruto was rushing in and RC had no choice but to follow. They stepped into a large dark room. Naruto let out a gasp. "Kakashi-sensei!" The ninja raced to the middle of the room that was illuminated by a lone white light. RC too advanced and could make out the figure of the older ninja suspended in the air by the nasty-looking chains hanging from the ceiling. Hataki's head was drooped, and he seemed to be unconscious as he slowly swayed back and forth in his bonds. As the Autobot hurried closer, she could see the human was very pale, even more so than usual. That usually wasn't a good sign. "RC, can you shoot the chains?" Naruto asked anxiously, hands speeding through the weird marks and creating 2 clones to his side. The femme nodded grimly, raising her weapon to fire quick shots at the chains. They broke easily enough, and the clones caught the falling ninja and carefully laid him down to the floor. At the sound of approaching footsteps, RC turned her head at their makeshift entrance. She retreated back by the hole on the wall and saw a group of Vehicons running towards them through the corridor. She raised her weapon and began to shoot to keep them from getting any closer. The cons took quickly cover and began to return the fire, attempting in vain to advance through her cover fire. Naruto concentrated on getting the cold, heavy chains off of his teacher. They rattled and clanked as he threw them away on off of his sensei. The copy nin's arms would probably be badly bruised, and his black shirt was already ragged and torn at the sleeves. He heard RC's cover fire by the broken wall, and knew it was only a matter of time until the cons would be flowing in from the door and the hole and have them surrounded in no time. They'd have to get out of there now. He finally got the chains off and knelt by his unconscious teacher, lightly tapping one masked cheek. "Kakashi-sensei? Can you hear me?" His teacher's Hittite was up on his forehead, leaving both eyes uncovered. Naruto thought he saw the Jounin's eyelids twitch, but the ninja refused to wake up. "Sensei! Time to go, Naruto!" he heard RC call out. "We need to get going." Naruto grabbed the copy nin's shoulders and shook him. "Sensei!" Kakashi-sensei let out a muffled groan and sluggishly blinked his eyes, the left one opening only a fraction before closing again. Then the Jounin was peering up at him with the familiar one-eyed gaze. "Naruto?" Naruto nearly let out a relieved laugh that was a bit more shaky than he would like to admit. "It's me, Sensei. Don't worry, we're getting out of here." He reached to tug down the Hittite so the older ninja wouldn't accidentally drain his already minimal chakra reserves. Naruto stepped back so the 2 shadow clones could lift the barely conscious Jounin sensei from the floor. "RC!" Naruto shouted. "Let's go!" RC was still firing at the Vehicons outside. Naruto heard a crash and a thump and then silence. RC hurried to stand by him in the middle of the room. "Okay," RC said. "Let's." There was a hissing sound of a door opening and a blinding moment when the lights in the room flashed on. Megatron stepped into the cargo hold and was immediately met with the sight of the group of intruders standing in the middle of the room. His optics quickly raked over the scene, the hole on the wall, the Autobot RC, before stopping his gaze on the blonde boy and his 2 lookalikes supporting the captured ninja who had been freed from the chains. Interesting. His entrance had, of course, been immediately noticed, and everyone's attention was quickly trained on him. RC had whirled around to aim her gun at him, and the blonde human boy had swiftly moved to stand in front of his unconscious-looking comrade. Megatron mentally scoffed. These pests truly were as bad as the Autobots themselves, sacrificing themselves over every little thing. "A rescue attempt," he drawled while walking a few steps closer. "I wouldn't have expected anything less foolhardy from the Autobots." As there currently weren't any more Vehicons trying to swarm in from the break in the cargo hold wall, though more reinforcements were on their way, RC was still steadily aiming her weapon at him. The human child had narrowed his eyes slightly, as had the 2 copies behind him. "Though I must admit," Megatron continued, further inspecting the 2 creatures that without a doubt were somehow a result from the human's powers, before bringing his other servo from behind his back to view and gesturing it towards the group, "that it appears to be that this time some rather unprecedented means were used to get aboard my ship." The human straightened his back and sent the Decepticon a rather impressive glare. "So you are that mega-something guy, aren't you?" Megatron narrowed his optics, fist clenching. The insolent little brat was going to pay for that later. Close enough, human. Yes, I am Megatron, Lord of the Decepticons. Your friend here too worked it out quite quickly, he said in a tone someone might have mistaken to have a hint of amusement in it. RC moved uneasily. Megatron chuckled. And I must say, you seem to be as foolishly defiant as your comrade. He did withstand the interrogation rather admirably for a human. The boy's eyes flashed. What did you do to him? He yelled, taking half a step forwards. Naruto, the Autobot said, her voice slightly strained. So that was the beast's name, Megatron thought as he watched the human boy closely. He remembered every detail of the video footage Soundwave had collected from the battleground. He knew that by threatening Naruto's comrade the boy was likely to lose himself and succumb to whatever power inside him reigned the beast. It would be risky to make the boy too protective of his companion, or Megatron would soon have a raging monster aboard his ship. That could ruin all his plans in a click. But the Deception Warlord was not about to let the humans leave easily either, of course not. He didn't like to admit it, and he never would allowed. But reinforcements were needed and he would have to stall the foolish beings until that. Some simple information gathering, he replied, taking half a step forwards and flicking his fingers slightly as if the matter was of no great importance at all. The boy tensed his shoulders. RC's optics narrowed further. Information? Naruto asked dubiously. Of what? Megatron leveled him with a piercing red glare. It's not every day one comes across humans capable of taking out teams of my Decepticons, he said. Naturally, I am curious, Naruto snorted derisively. I bet he told you nothing. Kakashi-sensei would never do that. Megatron smirked. Maybe, he said. But I got enough. That little piece of dash. From the corner of his eye Naruto saw RC narrow her optics and steady her weapon. He knew what the Autobot was thinking. It wouldn't be long until more cons would swarm the place, and then they'd never get out. The Megatron thing hadn't yet shot them to bits, so Naruto could only think they would try to capture him and recapture Kakashi-sensei. And RC? She would probably be shot to pieces, like that was going to happen. But they had to get out now, no matter how much he wanted to tear the con leader to little pieces of junk metal. Naruto, RC said quietly, the floor? Then she fired. For a second or two Naruto stared at utter bafflement as the bot rushed forwards, firing rapidly and forcing Megatron to step back and raise his own weapon. Then Naruto's hands were moving and new clones appeared to the cargo bay, most of them immediately dashing towards the Decepticon leader. It was only a few seconds after that when he already had one more Rasengan on his palm. He heard RC grunt as Megatron shot her straight to the shoulder, forcing her to stagger back. As Megatron shot the approaching clones into puffs of smoke, Naruto slammed the Rasengan to the floor. There was another screeching sound of metal forcibly torn open and broken, and a gaping hole appeared on the cargo hold floor. Freezing wind rushed inside and nearly made him stagger. Naruto didn't even have to shout for RC as the blue Autobot was already there, yelling go at him with no small amount of franticness. And Naruto didn't even think twice as he jumped into the nothingness, the clones holding Kakashi not far behind. Then there was nothing but the wind rushing in his ears and the still far away yet uncomfortably rapidly approaching ground below him. Oh, he thought. Maybe I should have thought about this a bit more. Ratchet! He barely heard RC scream from somewhere behind / above him. We'd really like that ground bridge now. Megatron waved his hand through the sudden cloud of smoke before him, so those copies weren't much use after they got hit, and growled in annoyance as he saw the empty space around the hole on the floor. Those crafty little critters apparently had even more tricks they were hiding. He raised his optics up to the ceiling where there was a security camera situated neatly so it would have a clear image of the whole room. There was a red light burning, indicating it had seen and recorded the whole thing. There was a sound of the door hissing open behind him and a group of Viacons rushed in. At the same time Knockout was stepping through the gap in the wall, inspecting it with interest. I see someone has decided to redecorate the cargo hold, the doctor said with a chuckle. Megatron sent him a glare that could have withered lesser beings and the doctor fell silent. The Viacons fidgeted agitatedly behind him, but seemed to be confused by the lack of aggressive punishment from failing to arrive in time. Sir. One of the Viacons started with a hesitant tone. A few others took a careful step back. What are we going to do about the escaped prisoner? That time will come, Megatron said, almost to himself as he stared at the fresh exit route on the floor. The wind was still howling in through it. The Decepticon leader turned to face Knockout. Doctor, I take it you got it ready? Knockout crossed his arms and chuckled. Purring like a well-oiled machine, my liege. Megatron turned to walk out from the cargo hold and back towards the elevators. Excellent. Chapter 15. It was a rather strange feeling, Naruto thought as he fell into the green swirling vortex that had appeared right underneath him. to have your center of gravity suddenly ripped away and forcefully relocated. There was a moment of utter weirdness as his brain couldn't quite yet comprehend what was happening before the feeling of down was re-established and the world around him twisted, turned, and made sense again. As much as it can make sense when you're falling through a damn portal. Someone without chakra would have been in a much more serious mess in this situation, because even if the center of gravity had switched places and he wasn't falling several miles towards the ground anymore, he was still moving and could hit something if he wasn't careful. Like a wall. Which would be pretty unhealthy. The Autobot base suddenly appeared around him as he emerged from the other end of the ground bridge. He rolled as he hit the floor, using chakra to soften the blows and to slow down. Fortunately, his slide across the base floor came to a halt before he could hit anyone or anything. He straightened from the crouch and stood up a little shakily. After all, just a moment before he had been free falling from a spaceship. That would make an awesome story someday. Naruto turned to face the portal and saw the two shadow clones hoist Kakashi-sensei better to their shoulders. Behind them, RC was just straightening up, holding her injured arm carefully still against her torso. Behind her, the green vortex continued its swirling, and after a short moment's smokescreen and Bumblebee ran through, looking a bit worse for wear but without any serious injuries. Apparently the distraction had been a success. They'd all made it. They were alive. By the Allspark, Naruto turned back to see Ratchet pretty much gape at the shadow clones. He wasn't the only one, as most of the Team Prime and their human friends were doing the very same. With the exception of Optimus Prime, of course. Naruto couldn't really imagine the Autobot leader gaping at anything. What on earth are those? Miko screeched, pointing at the doppelgangers, as if her meaning would otherwise be unclear. Shadow clones, of course, Naruto announced proudly. The doppelgangers waved cheerfully with their free hands. A shadow what? Right. Naruto's clones are very fascinating, but we can all admire them later, when Kakashi isn't in need of immediate medical attention, RC said emphatically, walking forwards and cradling her arm. That snapped at least one being into action, and June Darby stepped forwards. Get him on the bed, she ordered, completely ignoring the two clones and focusing entirely to her newest patient. Naruto motioned at the doppelgangers and the two nodded, dragging the unconscious Jounin to the hospital bed and carefully lifted him on it. Kakashi-sensei hung limply in the shadow clone's grasp, head lolling against his chest. It was at that moment when proper relief finally flooded through his veins, making the blonde boy legs feel shaky and hands tremble ever so slightly in the aftermath of the great adrenaline rush that had took place just minutes before. A big, probably very stupid-looking grin spread on his face. They had done it. They had gotten Sensei back. He had succeeded. It was all gonna be fine now. The years of working as a nurse had prepared June Darby for multiple situations containing injuries, blood, and hysteria. Those situations always required a certain kind of mindset, a certain behavior, so she could do what needed to be done and treat her patients the best she could. So when a child soldier and two of what seemed to be his clones holding up an unconscious man dashed through the ground bridge portal, she of course stopped, everyone stopped, to just stare at the sight in front of her and think impossible. And then she remembered who she was and what needed to be done, and everything else lost its meaning. The only thing that mattered was the patient and getting him treated. The clones, or whatever they were, followed the boy's orders quickly and brought the unconscious man to the hospital bed. June darted into action, checking the man's pulse first, and then his breathing. Or she attempted to check his breathing. But as she was about to hook her fingers under the black cloth mask that covered the man's lower face, a mask? Seriously. There was a hand clutching at her wrist and stopping the movement. June's gaze snapped up to meet blue eyes filled with determination. No, the blonde boy said, very carefully pronouncing the English word. June blinked and shook her head. I need to check his breathing. The mask may hinder it. No, Naruto said emphatically without taking the time to listen for a translation. No touch. He don't like. June sighed in exasperation. Could someone please explain it to him? She said, still holding the blue gaze. RC stepped beside Naruto and said something. The blonde boy answered in rapid Japanese, waving his free hand vehemently. RC met her eyes. Apparently he doesn't like to show his face. Even he, she nodded at Naruto, hasn't seen it. June very nearly said that she cared very little what the man liked or disliked. In her eyes, the silver-haired man currently lying on the hospital bed, Kakashi, his name apparently was at least partly responsible for the fact that a boy no older than 15 was running on and off of battlefields and war zones and enemy bases. Places he shouldn't have had to see in years to come. No, she didn't like this Kakashi character at all. But once more, she was a nurse. It didn't matter whether she liked her patients or not. She checked the man's chest. It was slowly rising and falling with inhaled and exhaled breaths. Fine, she relented, not sure if she was doing the right thing or not. He seems to be breathing all right for now, but I will take that thing off if it causes problems for him, she finished sternly, looking Naruto in the eyes as RC translated her words to him. And Naruto beamed, his eyes sparkling as a bright smile spread on his face. He immediately released her wrist and said something that even June, with her limited knowledge of foreign languages, figured out to be a sincere thank you. June returned the smile. She then carefully pulled up the headband, covering up even more of the man's face. When others gasped in shock and surprise, she merely blinked, another necessary skill acquired in medicine. Patients tended to get alarmed if the doctor gasped after seeing the injuries. June stared at the newly uncovered left eye and the thin, ragged scar that ran vertically across the man's face and neatly over the left eye. He's half blind? She thought, taken aback. Well, guess it wasn't that unusual if you saw melee battle as regularly as these strangers. Whoa! Miko gasped, peeking at the man from behind her. That's so cool. June frowned at the girl's totally inappropriate behavior. Naruto began to explain something rapidly, motioning at the eye and making some gestures of which meaning she had absolutely no idea. RC was once more working as a translator. That's the eye he was talking about earlier, she was saying. Apparently it has to be covered because he cannot turn it off. Their world really was a strange place, June thought rather dazedly as she pulled the headband back down so it was again covering the scarred eye that apparently wasn't blind at all but held some supernatural powers. Despite the growing strangeness, June then continued her work. The sleeves of the man's black shirt were a bit torn and ragged, so she carefully cut them open. The cloth revealed badly bruised arms with a few spots where the skin had been rubbed raw, with the trickles of blood dried on the skin. She heard the children gasp, and Ratchet muttered a quiet by the allspark. She too frowned worriedly at the injuries. She knew firsthand how unpleasant the Decepticons could be, but it seemed the man had gotten the worst of it. There was more damage to the man's clothes, she noticed as she continued the checkup. Small holes that seemed like they had been burned through. June leaned in closer and caught a sight of a small electric burn on the man's pale skin through the hole on the black shirt. She sighed. Well, she said briskly, he has sustained some burns. I need to check their severity and then treat them and the bruises, and I'd like to have some peace while doing it. Kakashi too would probably appreciate not to be gaped at while his injuries were taken care of. RC nodded and began herding the kids away. The blond boy seemed at first like he would resist, but in the end he followed others to the other side of the large room, every now and then glancing back at his teacher. June sighed and lifted her medical bag to a nearby table. It was time to get to work. What I'm failing to understand, Ratchet said, is why you didn't come to speak with me right away. RC scowled and probably would have shrugged if Ratchet hadn't been in the middle of fixing her mess of a shoulder. It wasn't that bad, she insisted. And Kakashi was in a much worse state. We needed to get him well first, and for that, Ratchet said with an emphasizing jab at her shoulder, we have Mrs. Darby here. RC quirked a small smile. I'm still fine, Ratchet snorted. Fine doesn't include having a laser hole in one's shoulder, part of it having been blasted clear off. What is with you nowadays, getting hurt in every fight? I just finished putting Wheeljack back together. I had to distract Megatron for Naruto, RC said matter-of-factly. Ratchet's optics jumped up to meet hers. Megatron shot you? Naruto needed time to. Ow, next time, I swear, I'll just leave you to your misery. Maybe that'll teach you. The medic grumbled, continuing his work. RC didn't seem to be taking his threats too seriously as the femme just chuckled. I'll keep that in mind. There was a sound of footsteps and Ratchet glanced over his shoulder to see Wheeljack approaching, soon coming to stand beside them. So, how are things over here? Fixing totally unnecessary wounds, Ratchet said. You have clearly infected your reckless behavior onto your fellow Autobots. At least Bumblebee and Smokescreen had made it from the Energon mine without requiring any immediate medical attention, although he would check them later too. Right after he'd get his current patient fixed back together. RC grimaced. It was far from unnecessary. Naruto couldn't have gotten us out otherwise. The kid really is something, right? The wrecker said, shaking his head. I mean, did you see those clone things? You wouldn't think things like that were possible. They aren't, at least for us, Ratchet reminded and carefully kept his optics on his work. Not much longer now, RC nodded. And you should have seen how he took out those cons. If I hadn't seen it I wouldn't believe it. How's Kakashi? Ratchet asked Wheeljack. Sleeping. According to Mrs. Darby he's going to make a full recovery despite his injuries, so he'll be just fine. RC smiled slightly. That's good to hear. Wheeljack wandered off, without a doubt going to pester someone else, and Ratchet got to continue his work in peace. The medic caught RC looking at the other side of the base. He turned to follow her gaze and saw Kakashi's still form lying on the hospital bed. Naruto stood beside him, his back to them so the medic couldn't see the expression on his face. "Good thing we got him out of there, right?" RC said. "It's good we got you all out of there," Ratchet commented, going back to his nearly finished work. "Sneaking on and off Nemesis is no small feat," RC snorted. "Don't know much of the sneaking out part, but I know what you mean. We were lucky, yes." RC's voice had gotten a distant tinge to it. "Maybe too lucky." Ratchet looked sharply up at her. "What do you mean?" RC seemed to stare at nothing for a moment, a thoughtful frown on her face. "I'm not sure. I just cannot help but wonder if we got away a bit too easily." "You got shot in the shoulder, RC. I wouldn't call that too easy, but he nearly had us. I just feel like he should have tried something, or just shot us all. Maybe he was planning something, but didn't make it in time." RC didn't look convinced, but her shoulders sagged and she let out a sigh. "Yes, maybe." They were both silent until Ratchet announced that he was ready and her shoulder was as good as new. Naruto stood by the plain hospital bed that had not too long ago been occupied by the blonde boy himself. It now had his teacher lying on it, pale and unmoving and dead to the world. The Jounin's silver hair fell over his face and the headband. With the mask still in its place, practically the copy nin's whole face was covered up. The chest, now clad in a large long-sleeved gray shirt, the black Jounin shirt had been beyond repair, was rising and falling slightly, revealing that the man really was alive, and not just a sickly-looking corpse in some quiet morgue. "Come on, Sensei," he said, "this is really getting old by now." As expected, Kakashi-sensei didn't answer. "All these naps though, it's probably a sign that you're getting old. Finally to match the hair, right?" Kakashi-sensei didn't reply to that either, even though it had been a funny joke. "But anyway, you really should wake up soon, 'cause I kinda ended up telling everyone everything before we came to rescue you, and they probably want to talk to you too 'cause you can explain everything much better than I, right?" Naruto sighed as the copy nin carried on sleeping. He bowed his head, for a moment staring at the base floor. He almost expected to hear a gruff, tired voice going, "Who are you calling old, kid? Or what have you done now, Naruto?" Or that when he'd lift his head his mentor would have one eye cracked open, regarding him with weary single-eyed gaze and the skin around his eye maybe crinkling a bit in an otherwise invisible smile. But as he raised his head, Kakashi-sensei was still deeply asleep, lying unmoving on the plain hospital bed, and it was all his fault. He heard Prime's steps long before the Autobot reached the two ninjas. It would have been quite embarrassing if he hadn't, and turned his head when Optimus came to a halt some steps behind him. "How is Hataki-san doing?" Prime asked with that grave voice of his. Naruto's shoulders twitched in an almost shrug. "Well, he's breathing, at least," he said, "and will hopefully wake up sometime soon." "Right, Sensei?" He turned back to his teacher who, shockingly, didn't react. Prime nodded and took the remaining steps to stand beside the blonde ninja. "The most important thing is that we got him away from the Decepticons," he said. Naruto nodded absently at the words, curling his hands into fists at the very thought of the filthy Decepticon scum tormenting Kakashi-sensei. "Sensei's strong," he said with absolute conviction. "He'll pull it through." Prime tilted his head. "Of that I have no doubt." Silence fell, but it was a comfortable one, Naruto mused as they stood there side by side and watched the unconscious ninja. He truly looked pale, Naruto thought. Sickly so. It was a transparent sort of pale, like he had lost all the strength to keep his very life on his face. His gaze dropped to the gray shirt that he knew covered many bandages and injuries. There was white bandage peeking from underneath the collar of the shirt, and the copy nin's arms were covered in towel-wrapped ice packs. They were meant to ease the swelling and pain, Mrs. Darby had explained. Anyway, Naruto thought, he looked ready to crumble. What is with that Megatron guy, anyway? He blurted suddenly, the words spilling from some deep concerned corner of his mind. What does he want? He flailed his hands at Kakashi-sen's sleeping form. What does he want with us? Optimus Prime was silent for a while, for such a long while that Naruto almost thought that he wasn't going to reply. So he looked up to the Autobot leader in surprise when he finally began to speak, with a grave voice with an echo of sadness in it. Megatron has, for a long time, been attempting to take over this world. For much longer than that he has been attempting to destroy the Autobots. But like most of evil things, he was not always like this. Back in our home world, he used to be a mere gladiator, though a greatly ambiguous one. At first his goals were much nobler, as he could see the deep corruption that had seeped into our planet, and wanted to end it himself. He asked the assistance of an old friend who promised to help him. I was that friend, but he was rejected by our High Council and I, instead, was accepted. Megatron saw this as a betrayal, and with his followers, he waged war. After eons and eons of battling each other, Cybertron was in ruins, and only a shadow of the glory of the Golden Age. Prime fell silent for a moment, looking down at the blond young man standing beside him. Now, for him, the only thing that remains is to force us to perish so he can finally create a Cybertron to his own liking. Naruto stared up at him. So he's dead set on killing you? Even though you two were friends? Prime bowed his head. Yes. Once, he was my brother. Naruto looked away and stared at his sleeping teacher instead. Kakashi-sensei's status hadn't changed. He probably hadn't even shifted in his sleep. Naruto thought of friends turned enemies, of desperate attempts to get them back. He thought of the years to come. I have a friend like that, he heard himself say, eyes still on his sensei. Or had. Optimus didn't reply, and Naruto read it as a nudge to carry on. Or I don't really know if we were ever really friends, you know. More like enemies from the start. He's really annoying, always thinks he knows everything and that he is better than anyone else. Naruto huffed in annoyance. But we were teammates, and he saved my ass a couple of times, and I did the same for him, and we were a team, no matter how much of an idiot he was. He stopped, lowering his gaze to the base floor and stuffing his hands deep into his pockets. But he left, he continued, his voice growing angry. For some stupid revenge he left the village, and I promised our friend that I'd drag him back to Konoha if I had to. So I chased after him, he scrunched up his nose, and I failed. And after some time I chased after him again, and I failed again. Naruto kicked at the floor with a frustrated huff. He left the village to train with some creepy traitor. Why would he do that? And now I've fought with him more than once and got my ass kicked more than once, even though I promised Sakura-chan I'd make him return. Another silence, this one heavy, fell. Kakashi-sensei twitched in his sleep. So do you think the same thing is gonna happen? That I'll fail again and again and years will pass until he's only an enemy I dimly remember being an ally? A friend? Naruto then dared to look up at the Autobot leader, meeting the Prime's serious blue gaze. For Megatron and I, began Optimus Prime, there has been years and years of fighting over our home, then years of chasing and fleeing across the galaxies. And now, in human time frame, a long battle over the Earth. I would be a fool to think that Megatron would be likely to reconcile. That would endanger not only the Autobots, but humans as well. Prime bowed his head. Unfortunately, we are centuries late in reaching peace without one of us falling. The only option left for us is to continue fighting, or accept destruction. Then he raised his head and once more looked Naruto in the eyes. But for you and your friend I strongly believe it's far from being too late. Naruto stared up at him for a short while before smiling. I'll remember that, he said. Thanks. And the Autobot leader actually returned the smile. Almost, at least. You are most welcome.